2019 is shaping up to be a year of historic flooding in several parts of the United States. Early flooding in March impacted several communities along the Missouri and Mississippi rivers. This region features 59% of the nation's corn-producing farmland, which produces roughly 67% of the nation's corn output. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Agency expects flooding to continue through May. NOAA's Spring 2019 Outlook identified the major reasons for this year's historic flooding. So let's run through 4 of the big ones. Okay, breaking news, more rain means more flooding. As the weather warms up heading into April, the atmosphere retains more moisture, which leads to more rain.
We've had an abnormal year when it comes to precipitation through the winter months. This past winter season, we saw it's 200% of normal as far as precipitation. So we've got a lot of snow water equivalent sitting on the ground.
Snow water equivalent is the amount of leftover water if an entire unit of snow were to melt. Reason number 2, excess amounts of snow. In late winter, several portions of the Midwest experienced something called abomogenesis.
You get this storm system, and it was like a bombogenesis that came through, jumped out into the plains. It produced hurricane-force winds across the central part of the country. So you had the battle of the warm air and the cold air. You had that warm air was advecting up. It was melting that snow that was ready to release. On the backside of it, you had, snow and those still hurricane-force winds, and turned into blizzard conditions.
That weather pattern of extreme cold, followed by relatively extreme heat, further exacerbated flooding. Reason number 3, frozen ground and fully saturated soils. That extreme cold caused another problem. The topsoil froze, which made the ground less permeable, like concrete. Water that would usually absorb into the dirt had nowhere else to go. This is the same concept that makes cities with vast networks of roads more susceptible to flooding.
We had this, a lot of precipitation in the form of rain prior to it freezing. So, that ground is saturated to a certain level. The freeze depth will grow just like that. We see the ice on the river systems. And what happens when that ground actually freezes, it becomes a hard surface. So any rain that falls on it, it just shoots it right off. Rain on top of snow, on top of frozen ground, and it's just a perfect combination for a flooding event.
The soil along the Missouri River, a significant hotspot of flooding this year, doesn't irrigate easily. The weather across the Midwest also led to excessive ice deposits. These large chunks of ice can eventually jam up the free flow of water downriver, like a natural dam. When the river is jammed, floodwaters can temporarily overspill even further onto farms or other property. Some farmers were left waiting for days or even weeks for floodwaters to recede from their property. So what's the impact? For farming communities along the Missouri River, think Nebraska, Iowa, South Dakota, the impact is substantial. The flooding comes at the beginning of planting season for many of the farmers in the region, and some farmers are still waiting to survey the damage done as floodwaters recede. These delays will carry big implications for the entire agribusiness supply chain.
Floodwater has contaminated some of what was in farmers' grain bins, which could mean some fairly substantial losses for farmers.
Delays in the beginning of planting season also may prompt farmers to plant soybeans rather than corn because soybeans can be planted later. Also, transportation networks are running slower due to the flooding. That may impede the agribusiness supply chain as shipments stall while floodwaters recede from obstructed roads or rail lines. Compared to this time last year, there were 14% less grain carloads in transport. Grain barge movements were also down about 31% compared to this time last year. The impact of the slowdown is already weighing on grain traders. One company told the Journal that flooding would cut its first quarter operating profit by up to $60 million. The slowdowns are even reaching into the energy sector as the supply of corn slows down. Gasoline prices are up 7% compared to the same time last year. The National Weather Service cautiously notes that the worst of flood season may be in the rear-view mirror.
I hate to say this, we might have seen the worst by now.
But the impact of the flooding from early March will be felt for months to come.